Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I think we lost certain members of the media for one of those, if it bleeds, it leads stories. So, but we appreciate other folks standing by to talk a little bit about energy. We were pleased here in New Bedford to host America's mayors, America's leading mayors in the energy field, to talk about next steps. We are here in America's first energy capital. We're actually in a building that was once an oil refinery, a whale oil refinery, to talk about energy issues that are so relevant and timely today and pressing today. We hosted here some 18 mayors from coast to coast, many of whom have left. It's Friday, had to hit the road to go back home and deal with all the other things that we mayors are responsible for in our day. But I just wanted to now just have the mayors who remain here just introduce themselves to the audience. Go ahead, Brian.
Mayor Brian Waller, Piscataway, New Jersey.
Mayor Ethan Strimling, Portland, Maine.
Mayor Gary McCarthy, Schenectady, New York.
Shane Bemis, Mayor of Gresham, Oregon.
Richard Thomas, Mayor of Mount Vernon, New York.
And of course, our Executive Director, Tom Cochran, who has been a leader on energy issues for many, many years and has been has used very skillfully for that, over the course of that time, the convening power of the conference to allow mayors to exchange ideas about renewable energy and energy conservation. And Tom, you've been instrumental in all these efforts over the years. You're looking at mayors who have led the way, among many others around the country, in making our energy consumption cleaner, more resilient, and more reliable over the years. If there is any, we talk oftentimes about how mayors have assumed responsibility for many things that have traditionally been, many issues that have been traditionally left to the federal government. I don't think there's any better example than in the area of energy. If you ask folks 20 years ago, if you've said to someone 20 years ago, what would you think if mayors and cities were or the leading edge of energy policy in this country, and the reaction you get would be that you're just downright nuts. But that is the reality. America's mayors have led the way, starting more or less in the early part of this current century, in making our cities safer through, among other things, by making creating opportunities for the consumption of clean energy, and doing it in a way that saves taxpayer dollars, creates jobs, and it makes our cities more resilient. So for New Bedford's part, you've heard some of this. I'll just note, it's worth noting that it's cities of every stripe. It's not cities, necessarily wealthy cities or large cities, but it's also mid-sized cities like New Bedford that have serious resource constraints. And New Bedford is a national leader on solar. In 2014, the Wall Street Journal reported that New Bedford had more installed solar capacity than any city in the continental U.S. We have the largest fleet of electric cars in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and one of the most in the Northeast. We've doubled our recycling rate. We have we have the third largest energy aggregation, residential aggregation program in the country, and we're doing more and more. And one of the big things that we're doing, of course, we'll be getting into in the years ahead, is the offshore wind industry. All the mayors you see here and many more around the country have similar brag sheets, as kids like to say, in this area. We've been doing it, and we've been doing it at times with the help and support of the federal government, and at times not. The attitude of America's mayors is, let's plow ahead, let's do, as Tom says, we are not a think tank, we are a do tank, and we are getting it done. But we are also at a point now in our country's history where our cities are growing and technology is accelerating. So by most predictions, there will be another 70 million Americans in the next 50 years, and almost all of them, about 96% by some estimates, will live in cities. So our cities will continue to grow. They'll continue to be the primary places where energy is consumed and carbon is emitted in our world. And all those data points are more or less mirrored across the world. So we've got to continue to lead, but as we do need to partner with the federal government. We do need to think about the future, not just for us, but for our kids and our grandchildren. So we talked about this stuff over the course of the last few days. Many of the new technologies that are being deployed in cities, whether it's in the case of offshore or land-based wind, fuel cells, thermal loops, energy storage, or smart city technologies that are evolving all the time. These are all the things that cities need to be focusing on. We also know that these aren't academic exercises. Again, we are where the rubber hits the road. We want people to have opportunity. So we know that these are areas where we can create jobs and save taxpayer dollars and become more resilient. That's where the effort is. And we also know, and we're reminded in stereo in the last couple of weeks, that places, especially along the coast, but in other places far from the coast, we need to be resilient. And so if you look at the experiences that, and I say in the present tense, experiences now in Florida and Texas, these are folks who will know and get to learn the hard way that energy resilience is important for basic life needs. So when we see things like in South Florida, the power going out at in a nursing home and the inability of that nursing home to run its air conditioners, and that's leading to the deaths of certain frail folks, seniors at those nursing homes. We know that that is a problem that cities have to deal with. Similarly with businesses like the chemical plant in Houston that blew up because they couldn't restart the power. There are endless examples that we'll continue to learn about in the weeks ahead as those communities struggle to get back on their feet with the help of a lot of folks here and through the conference, of course. But there will be many lessons learned. But these issues are front and center before us, and we're going to be dealing with it. And one of the ways that one of the things that we focused on this week is what should we be asking the federal government for? Not in the way of direct assistance. All the mayors you see here are very practical and pragmatic. We understand the federal government's not going to be giving money away, but the federal government does have a role to play in accelerating the deployment of certain technologies that will make people safer. Ask people in Houston now, ask people in Miami about these things, ask people up and down the Gulf Coast of Florida. The federal government can play a role, and as we see it here, there will be in the years ahead, when the years ahead is Congress, and the months ahead as Congress begins in earnest its discussion around a new infrastructure bill, we have to think about energy security, and we have to think about how cities can get back online, how they can be more resilient, how they can protect their residents better, and be greener all the while, and create the jobs related to all those things. So what will emerge from this conference are a set of principles that will be styled as the New Bedford principles that will help answer some of those questions, that will get at what role the federal government should play in facilitating the ability of cities to get back on their feet in the event of an event that, like the ones that we've seen play out in the southeast over the last couple of weeks. So again, that will all emerge. I just want to say, I really want to thank my fellow mayors for coming to New Bedford and for sharing their ideas, which are abundant. We had a very substantive discussion around all of these issues, and I want to thank our president, Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, for taking the lead on all these matters. Mayor Landrieu has experienced probably as much as anybody in America the need for resilience and knows it in his bones, and he's tasked us with coming up with a set of principles, and that's what we're working on now. And I, of course, want to thank our CEO and executive director, Tom Cochran, for his lead as well. As I mentioned again, Tom has been at the forefront of energy issues going back before the Energy Block Grant Program some 10 years ago that cities used so successfully. So thank you again, Tom. And with all that, I want to call up my predecessor as the chair of the Energy Committee, Gresham Mayor Shane Bemis, to say a few words. Shane is a trustee of the conference, and he's also also a tremendous leader in the Pacific Northwest on municipal energy issues, and has contributed mightily to the discussion today. Shane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and what a pleasure it's been to be in New Bedford. What a beautiful city. Thank you, Tom Cochran, for all of your work in energy and for continuing to have the mayors amplify why energy is important and how we are actually getting results on climate change. One of the great things about mayors, is, as Mayor Mitchell said, is they're very practical. And when we talk about climate change, or we don't talk about climate change, we look at the principles that can move us forward and get results in the area of climate change. And for us, we don't talk about, as I said, we don't talk about climate, we talk about return on investment. So for Gresham, we have framed all of our discussions, even though we are in the Pacific Northwest and we're in a very green state, my city is still relatively red, moving more purple. And as a Republican mayor, I've found that while I believe the science in climate change, it's easier for me to talk, instead of on the moral ground, it's easier to talk about the return on investment ground. And that's what we've done. We've took our #1 energy user at our wastewater treatment plant, and in 10 short years, we turned that into a net zero plant. And what that means for us is that we have the lowest wastewater rates in the entire Portland metropolitan region out of 26 cities. So it's real money, saves our ratepayers about $1 million a year, which is real money to them that they can then spend in the economy. All the while, we achieve the goals of climate. So I think what you see out of this group of mayors and in the conference as we talk about energy is that kind of practicality. And I think while the state legislature and the federal government is mired in the moral debate, we're down on the ground actually making it happen. And so the point that we want to leave with is that we know how to get these things done. We know how to get these projects done. We know how to do them on time, on budget, and we don't get stuck talking in these silos again about where the rest of the nation is kind of at a stalemate on this. We can still meet the Paris Climate Accord by doing things where we're talking about investing and getting that return. We can take our chambers of commerce, and you can talk to any business person in the world and say, look, you invest this, you're going to get this return. They say, okay, well, they've just made a climate decision and they didn't even know it. So that's the kind of practicality, again, that my fellow mayors offer, and it's always great to be with them and learn from the nation's mayors where things are actually getting done. So I just want to say thank you to Mayor Mitchell, thank you Tom Cochran for hosting this. It's an important time, and it's a time where I think the nation's mayors can lead on this issue and can move this country forward in a way that the federal government cannot. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Bemis. Do any of the other mayors wish to speak? There are only a few of us left. A lot of folks have departed over the last few hours, but just open up the mic if anybody wants to step up. Anybody?
I'll just add, once upon a time, a tree fell in Ohio and it caused a northeast blackout. And we have to remind ourselves that since 2003, not much has been done on resiliency, and this is our time right now. And I thank the Conference of Mayors, and I thank Mayor Mitchell for hosting us in New Bedford, and I thank Tom Cochran in the U.S. Conference for pulling us together to focus on this very important, vital resource, our energy infrastructure, because we have major events down in Houston, Florida, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands that all reflect the need to keep the lights on. And what can we do now to make sure that they stay on even during or after a storm? So we look forward to presenting the New Bedford principles in the coming months. But the bottom line is we as mayors are responsible for the potholes, the street lights. We're responsible for the sidewalks and making sure that the local economy keeps moving. And part of that is making sure that families can continue to enjoy their quality of life in the communities they live. And here in New Bedford, be it the changing of the season when the temperatures dove with the polar vortex, to the time when there were just other constraints with respect to delivering power along transmission lines in the Northeast, particularly in New York. These challenges are seasonal and they impact everybody in their wallet. So as we make these investments in our energy infrastructure, the return will be on more savings, more grid reliability, and the bottom line is families will be able to enjoy their quality of life. So these things all add up. These little things are big things, and I can't thank the conference enough for taking the lead on this.
All right, thank you, Mayor Thomas. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so we'll open it up for questions.
Mayor Mitchell, you talked about the federal government needing to, aid in some kind of way. with, you know, the pullout of the Paris Climate Agreement, how did the conversations this time around maybe change or alter than maybe years past?
Yeah, I think so. We talked about Paris. We talked about the pledge that all of these mayors and I and so many others across the country made to make our cities 100% renewable, or rely on 100% renewable energy over the years. Many of us have made strides, great strides in that direction. In New Bedford's case, we're about 70% renewable at this point. But we understand that it's getting there is going to take a number of steps, sort of a varied stack of both measures that will reduce supply, conservation measures, as well as sourcing of renewables from a number of different places, whether it's solar, wind, cogeneration, thermal loop, I mean, you name it, it needs to be part of the mix. And so part of the effort this week was really about idea exchanges, and that's something that we'll continue to do on an ongoing basis through the Energy Committee, so that the mayors have the benefit of the wisdom of everybody else around the country, and that's one of the great benefits of being part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
How can mayors get their seat at the table? I know you guys mentioned that yesterday. How it's really important to get your seat at the table in the federal discussion. Can you just talk about some ways that you guys plan on getting your voices heard by Congress?
Yeah, so we understand, because the President has said so and because congressional leaders have said so, that work will continue on an infrastructure bill. What that looks like is anybody's guess at this point, and there are competing approaches right now to that bill. But we also know, that that infrastructure, those proposals might follow tax reform, immigration reform, and a number of other major legislative initiatives. So we've got time to pull this stuff together. But what we want to do, and what we want to do with this idea of the New Bedford principles, is to work into the infrastructure bill that the idea that energy has to be part of the mix. I mean, when we think about the word infrastructure, people's eyes glaze over, and to the extent that they don't, they think roadways and bridges, but infrastructure is a lot more than that. It's ports, as we appreciate here, and as many mayors appreciate, and it's also energy. And so, we need to understand that, and again, just take a look at Florida and the Virgin Islands and Houston. There's energy infrastructure that had it been in place, and this is no Monday morning quarterback of those places, it's true of just about everywhere in America, but there are things that, had they been in place, it wouldn't have been as bad, right? And so we need to be making those ideas real through mechanisms like the reinstitution of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which was very successful and kickstarted energy initiatives at the local level a few years ago that have continued more or less unabated. We need to be thinking about tax incentives like the production tax credit and the investment tax credit that are going to be phasing out in the next few years, but have been instrumental in getting the wind industry off the ground in this country. So there will be we're going to be chewing on this for the weeks and months ahead as we tee up the New Bedford principles for Congress and for the administration and for the conference more generally. And hopefully we're going to get in the long run get us to a place where the federal government can really help us accelerate the deployment of new technologies that make our city safer. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I think one of the concerns when talking about an infrastructure bill, I suspect, given the fact the paralysis down in Washington right now, I have a feeling the relief for the Virgin Islands, Texas, and Florida will probably end up being the infrastructure bill, because I don't think there's going to be much money to go around after whatever the damage assessments are going to be. But as Mayor Mitchell had said before, we want a seat at the table, because whatever policy is promulgated out of Washington, D.C. or the state houses, ultimately it comes down to the local level where we have to put that in effect. So the reason why we want a seat at the table is because we probably have already past practices where it's more applicable to getting their thought process, train of thought, over the finish line. So too often, you have governors and members of the legislature or members of Congress coming up with policy initiatives that just aren't workable at the local level, and it defeats the whole purpose of what they're trying to do. So that's why mayors are looking for a seat at the table to work in partnership with folks in Washington and the respective state houses.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Walker. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
A reference was made to the Paris Accords. Following Kyoto, when our government did not sign the Kyoto Accords, we stood up and said 150-something nations have signed the Kyoto Accords. I'd like to have 150 mayors sign a climate agreement. And from that, we went forward with over 1,060 mayors that signed our own climate agreement in the United States. And of course, that was followed by the European Union with the Covenant of Mayors, and also the Mexican Association of Mayors. So presidents, dictators, queens, and kings, and tribal leaders get together and fight and talk, but the mayors of the world walk. And we are doing things to save our planet. Next week, we meet in New York City with the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, who's head of the C40. Next week is Climate Week. We will continue to work with the other mayors in the world to share best practices. We've come to New Bedford today to let the federal government and the Congress know that if we do come forth with a infrastructure bill, it has to have an energy component in it. And so we're very pleased to be here. New Bedford, the fishing capital of the world, the scallop capital of the world, and really the little city that stuck its finger in the dike when it built the barrier 20 feet high, 3.5 miles long, following the Netherlands, is an example of how this city has led the way. We had a former mayor, Mr. Willard, he came last night. There's something about this city that presents to us great leaders. And we have today Mayor Mitchell, who is leading the way. We appreciate his leadership, and we will continue as we go forward, do the best we can in the heritage of this city. And we appreciate the support that he gives and all the mayors that came to New Bedford, and we will continue in this fight. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Tony. All right, probably have time for one more if you guys have anything else.
I was just curious.
Yeah,
I was just curious, from when you talk about disaster management, emergency management, what are some of those aspects that can be implemented, whether, they're 2 weeks from now or 10 years from now, what are some of those aspects that will kind of keep the power on and help out in those situations?
Well, but without building things like additional microgrids, you're talking short term. Well, we have, every city, and certainly Mayor Waller, who experienced Sandy firsthand, can speak to this. We all have our hurricane preparedness steps, which are listed entirely on our website. We've been through it. We got a little bit of Sandy. We got the brush of Sandy a few years ago and went through all those drills. I do note, and I think it's your question prompts me to add that we've got this hurricane in the mid-Atlantic right now, or tropical storm about to become again a hurricane named Jose, that people should keep an eye on. And we can talk a little bit offline about hurricane preparedness steps, but we are keeping an eye on. We're taking some preliminary preparations right now, and we'll continue through the weekend just in case. It's unlikely that it'll come here, but we're thinking along those lines because we must. We've been through these problems before, and there are little things that people can do to stay safe, and I'd be happy to, again, offline to go through that with you. The bigger things that we're talking about are the longer term solutions. How do you get hospitals and other critical facilities back online so that people are safe, nursing homes, large businesses, other critical facilities, wastewater plants, water treatment plants, all these things matter to keep the patient alive, right? Cities alive. These are almost like critical organs in a body, and we have to given the increased threats that we face these days, we have to be better positioned to respond. So with all that, I just want to thank all the mayors here. I want to thank the conference for really a terrific event, a very substantive event among folks who have been steeped in energy policy and who have bring a lot of great ideas to the table. And there's a lot of work ahead, but we're off to a really good start. So thank you very much, everybody.
Daddy, can I please have some cake?
How about some strawberries instead?
Yeah!
Actually, how about some fruit salad?
Yes! Why eat candy and sweet when you can satisfy a sweet tooth with yummy fruit?
Hey, you know you're not supposed to have any till it's ready.